Thing That Walked on the Ceiling. Chapter 1. Shadows in the Corner. It began on a night like any other, ordinary in every way except for the strange unease that crept into the room slowly but unmistakably. Emily had just finished her nightly routine and climbed into bed, the soft rustling of sheets the only sound in the quiet stillness of her small apartment. Yet, despite the familiar comfort, she felt an odd prickling at the back of her neck, as if unseen eyes watched from the darkness. She reached for the lamp at her bedside, casting the room into a gentle glow, reassuring yet incomplete. The corners of the room remained shrouded in shadow, unyielding even to the comforting light. Emily tried to shake off the eerie sensation, dismissing it as the product of her imagination, but then a subtle movement caught her eye. A fleeting shift in the darkest corner, so slight it could easily have been dismissed as a trick of the mind. Heart beating faster, she sat up, staring intently into the shadow. Nothing moved now, yet her instincts screamed at her that something was there, hiding, waiting. Her breath grew shallow, tension gripping her tightly. Gathering courage, she reached again, this time for her phone, shining its flashlight into the corner. The light revealed nothing but empty space, the innocent surface of the wall mocking her fear. Emily exhaled shakily, convincing herself it was nothing, merely shadows playing tricks on her exhausted mind. Yet as she lowered the phone, something deep within her knew this was only the beginning, a subtle warning of horrors yet to unfold, of the shadows that weren't merely shadows, but something far more sinister lurking in the corners of her world. Chapter 2. Footsteps Above. Emily awoke the following morning feeling drained and unsettled, the memories of the previous night's eerie encounter lingering at the edges of her mind. She tried to dismiss it, attributing her fears to exhaustion and an overactive imagination. But as the day wore on, she found herself glancing suspiciously at the shadows around her apartment, each harmless corner now seeming ominously threatening. Determined to distract herself, Emily busied herself with chores, cleaning her small living space meticulously, as if scrubbing away her anxieties along with the dirt. However, as twilight fell and darkness crept back into the room, her unease returned with force, an unsettling reminder of the unseen presence from the night before. She cooked dinner quickly, barely tasting the food, her mind preoccupied with the growing dread that refused to fade. Eventually, she gave in to exhaustion and climbed back into bed, turning off the main lights, but keeping a small lamp on as a comforting presence. Emily lay awake, eyes wide open, ears tuned to every small sound in the oppressive silence of the night. Just as she began to drift into an uneasy sleep, a noise jolted her awake. A soft, deliberate creaking from somewhere above her. Her apartment was on the top floor, with nothing but the roof above. Her eyes widened in alarm, heart racing as she strained to listen. Another creak followed, unmistakably the sound of footsteps moving slowly, purposefully across the ceiling. Fear gripped her tightly, making her breath catch in her throat. She glanced around, hoping to find a rational explanation, a loose tile perhaps, or the building settling. But the footsteps continued, rhythmic and deliberate, pacing steadily above her bed. Her imagination ran wild, conjuring images of something unnatural walking effortlessly across the ceiling, defying gravity and logic. Emily slowly sat up, her eyes fixed upward, following the path of the footsteps as they moved from one side of her bedroom to the other. Her body trembled with a primal, instinctive fear. Part of her wanted to flee, to run from her apartment and never return. Yet another part was paralyzed, rooted in place by the terrifying curiosity of what might happen next. The footsteps paused suddenly, directly overhead, plunging the room into a tense, unbearable silence. Emily held her breath, waiting anxiously for what came next. After an agonizingly long moment, the footsteps resumed, now retracing their path back to the opposite side of the room. The pattern repeated itself several times, back and forth, slow and deliberate, each step echoing loudly in her ears, taunting her inability to understand or escape it. Eventually, the footsteps faded, retreating into silence, leaving her shaken and alone once again. Emily stayed awake until dawn, her eyes fixated nervously on the ceiling, half expecting the steps to return at any moment. When sunlight finally streamed through her windows, casting comforting rays across the room, she felt relief, but only briefly. The memory of the footsteps lingered stubbornly, imprinting themselves deeply into her mind, making it clear that whatever walked above her had not finished its terrifying visitations. Chapter 3: The Whispering Walls. The following days blurred into a constant state of anxiety for Emily. Each evening brought with it a heightened sense of dread as darkness enveloped her apartment, transforming it from a comforting space into one filled with hidden threats. Though she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, the growing fear inside her refused to be ignored. Sleep had become increasingly elusive, replaced by restless nights spent tossing and turning, ears attuned to every minute's sound around her. Her exhaustion grew profound, yet her fear of what might happen when she closed her eyes grew even greater. One evening, as Emily sat alone in her dimly lit living room, sipping a cup of tea in an attempt to calm her nerves, she noticed something peculiar. It started faintly, a gentle rustling, barely audible like the soft whispering of leaves. She paused, cup halfway to her lips, ears straining to hear. Her heart quickened as the whispers grew clearer, still indistinct, but unmistakably voices coming from the walls themselves. Her blood ran cold, her body tensing instinctively. She rose cautiously from her seat, stepping slowly toward the wall, pressing her ear against its cool surface. The whispers intensified slightly, shifting from soft murmurs into fragmented sentences she could almost understand. Emily recoiled in shock, stepping back quickly, eyes wide with terror. The whispers were speaking her name. They called to her softly, coaxingly, in voices that felt strangely familiar yet frighteningly alien. "Emily," they echoed gently, layered with an unsettling urgency. Her breathing grew rapid and uneven, panic rising swiftly within her. She spun around, checking the corners of her room, looking desperately for the source. But there was nothing visible. Only the ordinary walls, silent and mocking in their apparent innocence. The whispers seemed to move now, following her as she retreated through her apartment, trying desperately to escape the relentless sounds. They surrounded her, encircling her, emanating from every direction and corner, each voice growing clearer yet more distorted with each passing moment. Emily covered her ears, attempting futilely to block out the whispers, but the voices pierced through her defenses effortlessly. They spoke of hidden fears, long-forgotten memories, and secrets she believed were buried deep within her past. Each whisper felt like a knife, slicing through her composure, unraveling her sanity bit by bit. "Stop!" she finally screamed, her voice echoing in the suddenly oppressive silence that followed. She stood trembling, her breathing harsh and labored, tears of fear and frustration streaming down her face. The apartment was quiet now, the whispers abruptly silenced, leaving only a heavy and unnerving calm. But the damage had been done. Emily knew she was no longer safe within her own walls. Something malevolent had infiltrated her sanctuary, turning it into a place of torment. The whispers had revealed truths she'd buried deeply, dredging them to the surface and leaving her vulnerable, exposed, and utterly terrified of what would come next. Chapter 4. Eyes in the Darkness. Days turned to weeks, and Emily's fears solidified into a constant, suffocating dread. Each sunset filled her with dread, the inevitable approach of nightfall marking the return of the unexplained phenomena that plagued her relentlessly. Yet despite her terror, she told no one, afraid she would be dismissed, or worse, labeled insane. One evening, after hours spent pacing her apartment, Emily reluctantly prepared for bed. She avoided looking into the corners, refusing to acknowledge the shadows that seemed to grow darker, thicker with each passing night. As she lay down, she switched off the main lights, leaving only a small lamp to cast a dim, reassuring glow. Minutes passed in tense silence. Emily kept her eyes fixed on the ceiling, praying sleep would come quickly. But her attention was soon drawn toward the large mirror opposite her bed, its surface reflecting the room dimly. At first, everything appeared normal, a perfect copy of her surroundings, until something shifted within the glass. Emily's breath hitched, her pulse quickening as she stared in disbelief. Two glowing eyes, faint yet unmistakably present, stared back at her from the shadows behind her reflection. The eyes glistened softly in the darkness, their gaze piercing through her very being, filled with an unsettling intensity that chilled her to the bone. Heart racing, she spun around, frantically searching behind her, but nothing was there, only empty space and familiar walls. She whipped back toward the mirror, and her stomach clenched. The eyes were still there, unwavering, watching her every move. Her mind raced wildly, searching for rational explanations, a trick of the light, perhaps a hallucination born from exhaustion. Yet no matter how she rationalized it, the eyes remained, unmistakably real, holding her captive under their silent scrutiny. Slowly, almost hypnotically, Emily moved closer to the mirror, her own eyes locked onto the glowing pair that observed her. As she drew nearer, the eyes began to shift, revealing the vague outline of a face, indistinct yet menacing, hidden deep within the shadows of the mirror. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible. The eyes blinked slowly in response, a silent acknowledgement that sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through her body. Suddenly, the eyes moved, shifting rapidly toward the edge of the mirror before vanishing entirely. Emily staggered backward, her body trembling violently as fear overtook her. She glanced around desperately, her breathing ragged and panicked, the realization dawning that the presence wasn't confined solely to reflections. It was here, somewhere, hidden within her room. A soft rustling behind her sent her spinning around, eyes wide with terror, but again, nothing visible greeted her, just silence, oppressive and taunting. Her paranoia mounted, the line between reality and illusion blurring dangerously. Exhausted and terrified, Emily sank onto her bed, wrapping herself tightly in blankets, eyes wide open and alert. She knew now, without doubt, something sinister had invaded her home, watching and waiting in the shadows. And tonight, the eyes had made it clear. They saw her, they knew her, and they intended to reveal themselves fully very soon. Chapter 5: Midnight Visitor. Emily had reached a breaking point. Nights turned into dreaded vigils where sleep was replaced by anxious anticipation. Each evening brought with it the haunting question of what would appear next, of what terrifying experience awaited her in the dark. One particularly cold evening, Emily sat curled up on her sofa, wrapped tightly in a thick blanket, attempting to read a book in a desperate bid to distract her restless mind. Yet, each paragraph blurred into incoherence, her thoughts persistently interrupted by an unshakable sense of dread. The room seemed colder than usual, an uncomfortable chill lingering in the air. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the quiet apartment, jolting Emily upright, her heart thudding painfully against her ribs. She stared wide-eyed toward the front door, breath held in fearful silence. Another knock followed, firm and deliberate, the sound harshly breaking the quietness of midnight. Emily rose slowly, cautiously approaching the door, her steps hesitant and fearful. "Who is it?" she called weakly, voice trembling, hoping for a rational explanation, perhaps a neighbor in need, a visitor lost and confused. But the silence that followed her question only deepened her terror. "Who is it?" she asked again, louder this time, though her voice still betrayed her fear. Again, no answer, only oppressive silence that seemed to press against the door itself. Gathering her courage, she peered through the peephole, her breath fogging the cold metal surface. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw nothing but darkness, pitch black and impenetrable. Panic surged, thoughts racing through her mind. Who or what could possibly stand directly at her door, hidden completely by shadow? Stepping back quickly, Emily fumbled with the chain and bolt, double-checking that they were securely fastened. Yet, even as she assured herself of her safety, the knocking resumed, louder, more insistent now, each strike rattling her doorframe violently. "Go away," she shouted desperately, voice quivering, her body shaking uncontrollably. "Please leave me alone." Abruptly, the knocking stopped, plunging her apartment back into unsettling silence. Emily stood frozen, listening intensely, hoping that whatever had come to torment her had finally given up. Her pulse hammered in her ears, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Just as she began to relax, believing the danger had passed, she heard something else, something even more terrifying. A soft scraping sound, slow and deliberate, moving along the hallway walls outside her door. It grew louder, closer, unmistakably heading toward her bedroom window. She raced frantically to the window, her breath shallow and ragged, hands trembling as she pulled the curtains aside. Nothing was visible outside, only the dark emptiness of the night. Yet the scraping continued, sliding now along the window itself, sharp and precise. Emily stumbled backward, her mind consumed by sheer panic. Whatever had come to her apartment wasn't deterred by locked doors or shuttered windows. It knew her, understood her fears, and toyed with her mercilessly. She spent the remainder of the night curled up on her sofa, eyes wide open and alert, ears strained to catch even the slightest sound. She knew now there was no escaping whatever had chosen her as its victim. It had marked her, and it intended to continue its nightly visits, each more terrifying than the last. Chapter 6. Scratches in the Night. The relentless nights were wearing heavily on Emily. Her apartment, once a refuge, had become a prison, each corner filled with unseen threats, every shadow hiding a potential nightmare. Yet, despite her growing desperation, leaving wasn't an option. Something compelled her to stay, to confront whatever terror haunted her. One particular night, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The air felt oppressive, as if charged with impending horror. Emily lay awake in bed, fully clothed and clutching her blanket, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her eyes were heavy, but she feared what dreams might await her. Just as she thought she might finally succumb to sleep, a faint scratching broke the silence. A subtle sound, barely audible at first, but undeniably there. Her heart lurched painfully, eyes snapping wide open. She strained to listen, hoping she had imagined it, but the sound persisted, slowly increasing in intensity, sharp and deliberate, emanating from somewhere within her room. Emily sat up, breath caught in her throat, scanning the dimly lit space around her. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, as if claws were scraping against wood. Her pulse quickened, dread pooling in her stomach as she pinpointed the noise. It was coming from beneath her bed. A surge of panic overtook her. The thought of something lurking beneath her, hidden just inches away, made her blood run cold. Trembling violently, she carefully leaned over the edge, peering cautiously into the shadowy space below. The scratching ceased abruptly, plunging the room into an unnerving silence. Emily's breathing grew rapid, ragged with fear. She drew back slowly, convinced now more than ever that something was there, hiding, waiting for her to lower her guard. Minutes passed, tense and silent. Just when she started to believe it was over, the scratching resumed, louder and more frantic, accompanied now by a low guttural sound. A disturbing, inhuman growl. Emily sprang from the bed in terror, her eyes wide with disbelief. She backed away quickly, pressing herself against the wall, heart racing uncontrollably. Her eyes darted around the room, searching desperately for an escape, but the scratching grew even louder, echoing throughout the apartment, impossible to ignore. It seemed to follow her, tracking her movements, clawing at her sanity. Summoning her courage, Emily moved cautiously toward the door, hands shaking violently as she reached out to turn the knob. As her fingers grazed the handle, the scratching stopped abruptly, leaving behind an eerie stillness. She stood frozen, paralyzed by fear, waiting anxiously for what would happen next. The silence stretched painfully, amplifying her dread. Slowly, carefully, Emily turned around, eyes fixed fearfully on the bed. A sudden movement caught her attention, a dark, indistinct shape slipping swiftly from beneath her bed, disappearing into the shadows across the room. Emily gasped sharply, stumbling back in terror, realizing with sickening certainty that she was not alone. Whatever had hidden beneath her bed had emerged, free now to roam her apartment, watching and waiting, ready to strike again. Her sanctuary was irrevocably compromised, transformed forever into a realm of nightmares. Chapter 7. The Upside-Down Man. Emily's grip on reality grew increasingly tenuous. She felt trapped in an endless nightmare, every waking moment consumed by fear and anticipation of the next terrifying occurrence. Her once cozy apartment now felt alien, hostile, and alive with malice. One night, as she lay restlessly in bed, Emily became aware of an unsettling silence, deeper and heavier than any she'd experienced before. The normal sounds of the city outside her window seemed strangely muffled, as if the world itself had been muted. A chilling sense of isolation settled over her, heightening her already fraught nerves. Suddenly, an unnatural rustling sound broke through the oppressive silence, pulling her attention upward. Her breath caught painfully in her chest as her eyes widened in shock. There, above her bed, slowly emerging from the shadows, was a figure. A man, impossibly suspended upside down from the ceiling. Emily froze in terror, barely able to breathe, her mind desperately struggling to process the impossible sight before her. The figure was motionless at first, blending disturbingly with the shadows. Gradually, she began to discern more clearly his grotesque features. Pale skin stretched tightly over sharp bones, eyes sunken and dark, fixed unwaveringly on her. She tried to scream, but fear rendered her mute. Her body trembled violently as she watched the figure slowly begin to move, shifting awkwardly yet fluidly along the ceiling toward her. His movements were unnatural, spider-like, every limb bending grotesquely, defying normal human anatomy. The upside-down man moved steadily closer, his expression blank but his gaze intense and predatory. Emily's heart hammered painfully against her ribs, each beat echoing loudly in her ears. She scrambled backward on the bed, pressed herself against the headboard, desperate to put distance between herself and the horrifying apparition. He stopped directly above her, suspended eerily just out of reach. He tilted his head slowly, studying her with a detached curiosity, as if fascinated by her fear. His mouth stretched into an unsettling grin, revealing teeth that were sharp, too numerous, and horribly twisted. Emily felt a wave of nausea wash over her, mingling sickeningly with her terror. "Leave me alone," she managed to choke out, voice strained with panic. Her desperate plea seemed only to amuse him further, his grin widening grotesquely. He slowly extended one distorted hand downward, long fingers reaching for her. Emily recoiled sharply, scrambling frantically to the edge of the bed. Yet no matter how far she retreated, he remained fixed directly above her, impossibly close, yet just out of reach, tormenting her with the mere threat of contact. Then, abruptly, he withdrew his hand, returning to his eerie stillness. His eyes continued to stare, unblinking and cold, locking Emily in an unending gaze of terror. She could do nothing but wait, paralyzed, until finally, after an eternity, he began to retreat, crawling slowly backward along the ceiling, disappearing into the darkness. Emily was left shaken and breathless, her sense of safety irreparably shattered. She knew now with horrifying certainty that the thing haunting her apartment was no mere phantom. It was something far more tangible, far more dangerous, and utterly inhuman. Chapter 8. Nightmare Reflections. Sleep had become Emily's greatest fear, as her dreams offered no escape from the horrors of her waking hours. Each night plunged her into unsettling visions, twisted reflections of her reality, where the sinister presence haunting her apartment took on increasingly terrifying forms. One particularly harrowing night, Emily found herself wandering through a distorted version of her home. The walls twisted and warped, pulsating grotesquely as if alive, breathing softly in the dim light. Mirrors adorned every surface, reflecting infinite, unsettling versions of herself. Yet each reflection was subtly wrong. Expressions distorted by terror or sinister smiles she never wore. Emily moved cautiously, each step echoing loudly in the oppressive silence. As she passed mirror after mirror, she noticed the reflections began to diverge more sharply from her movements, becoming autonomous, moving independently and staring back with eerie, knowing eyes. She paused before a large mirror at the end of a dark hallway, unable to look away as the reflection within began to shift disturbingly. Her mirror self grinned cruelly, eyes filled with malevolence, reaching out to press her hands against the glass. Emily recoiled instinctively, but her reflection leaned closer, whispering in a voice cold and unfamiliar, "You can't escape us, Emily. We live in your fear." Suddenly the glass rippled like water, and the reflection's hand emerged, fingers grasping for her with chilling determination. Emily stumbled backward, heart racing as the figure began pulling itself slowly from the mirror, twisting grotesquely through the liquid glass, impossibly real and terrifyingly tangible. Turning in panic, Emily fled down the hallway, desperate to escape the nightmare pursuing her. Yet every mirror she passed revealed more twisted reflections, each one clawing and grasping, trying to break free of their glass prisons to seize her. She reached her bedroom, slamming the door shut behind her, pressing her back against it, gasping for breath. Her relief was short-lived as the room around her shifted, mirrors appearing from nowhere, encircling her completely. She stood, trapped, surrounded by infinite reflections, each harboring a distorted version of herself, all glaring hatefully. In unison, the reflections spoke, their voices merging into a single chilling chant. "We are you, Emily. Your fear gives us life. You can never escape." Emily screamed in desperation, covering her ears, eyes tightly shut, but the voices grew louder, echoing relentlessly within her mind, tearing at her sanity. She collapsed to the floor, overwhelmed by terror and helplessness. Then, abruptly, she jolted awake, gasping, drenched in cold sweat. Her room was silent, mirrors gone, replaced by familiar walls. But the vivid nightmare lingered, its chilling message unmistakable. Her fears were not merely dreams. They were warnings, signs that the horrors stalking her nights had begun to seep dangerously into her mind, blurring the line between nightmare and reality. Chapter 9. The Forgotten Room. As Emily's fear intensified, she became consumed by the desperate need to uncover the source of the nightmares haunting her apartment. Each night brought with it new terrors, pushing her closer to the brink. Determined to regain control, she resolved to thoroughly search her apartment, hoping to find an explanation hidden somewhere within its walls. One gloomy afternoon, armed with a flashlight and steely determination, Emily began her search, examining every inch of her home meticulously. She checked closets, cabinets, and corners, feeling increasingly anxious, yet driven by the hope that answers lay hidden just out of sight. As she moved deeper into her exploration, she noticed something strange. A slight discrepancy in the hallway wall, as if part of it had been sealed off. Her curiosity piqued. She pressed gently against the area, surprised when a panel moved slightly, revealing the faint outline of a door. Heart racing with anticipation and dread, Emily forced the panel aside, uncovering a narrow doorway leading to a small, forgotten room she never knew existed. The air that rushed out was stale and heavy, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decay and long abandonment. Hesitantly stepping inside, flashlight illuminating the darkness, she discovered the room was filled with dusty furniture covered in sheets, their shapes ghostly and foreboding. Her heart pounded nervously as she slowly peeled back the coverings, revealing antique furniture, each piece frozen in time, perfectly preserved, yet eerily out of place. At the far end of the room stood an ornate dresser, its surface layered thickly with dust. Emily approached cautiously, compelled by some unexplainable urge. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled open a drawer, revealing an assortment of faded photographs and yellowed letters. She sifted carefully through the contents, her curiosity giving way to horror as she realized each photograph captured images of past tenants of her apartment, people whose faces were frozen in expressions of terror or despair. She shuddered violently, recognizing a cruel pattern. Each occupant had seemingly vanished, their lives cut short abruptly and mysteriously. A letter caught her eye, its brittle edges frayed with age. Carefully unfolding it, Emily read a cryptic, hastily scrawled note. "It walks the ceiling, it sees everything. Don't let it in." A wave of cold dread swept over her as the room suddenly felt impossibly colder. She glanced up sharply, her breath catching painfully in her throat. The ceiling above her was marred by strange marks, deep scratches, seemingly made by desperate hands attempting to claw their way out. Her flashlight flickered, plunging her momentarily into darkness before returning weakly. Panic surged through her, and she knew instinctively she had to leave immediately. Turning frantically toward the door, Emily saw in the dimming light a dark shadow slowly spreading across the ceiling, growing larger and more ominous. She bolted from the forgotten room, heart pounding painfully, slamming the panel shut behind her. She stood trembling in the hallway, gasping for air, realization dawning heavily upon her. The answers she sought only confirmed her worst fears. Whatever lurked in her apartment had tormented others before her, and now it intended to claim her as its next victim. Chapter 10. Crawling Fear. Emily's discovery of the forgotten room left her shaken, her grip on reality slipping further with each passing day. The horrors she'd witnessed and the disturbing realization that she wasn't the first victim filled her with unrelenting dread. She could no longer deny the malevolent presence that plagued her apartment, its sinister intent growing clearer each night. One evening, as darkness fell heavily over her apartment, Emily paced nervously, senses heightened, anticipating the inevitable terror that lurked in the shadows. Her heart hammered against her chest, each beat echoing loudly in the oppressive silence. Suddenly, a faint skittering sound reached her ears, sending a fresh wave of fear coursing through her veins. Her body tensed, eyes widening as she slowly turned toward the sound, heart pounding violently as she realized it was coming from the ceiling. Frozen in place, Emily stared upward, eyes straining to pierce the shadows above. Her breath caught sharply as something moved, shifting subtly within the darkness. The skittering intensified, quick and erratic, like dozens of tiny claws scraping against the surface above her head. Her eyes adjusted slowly, horror flooding her body as she began to make out countless shapes. Dark, indistinct figures crawling rapidly across the ceiling, their movements frantic and unnatural. Emily backed away in terror, hands trembling uncontrollably as she desperately sought escape. The crawling shadows spread swiftly, covering the ceiling entirely, their forms twisting grotesquely as they converged directly above her. Panic surged through her, making her limbs feel heavy and useless. Her mind screamed at her to flee, but her body remained paralyzed by sheer terror. Without warning, one of the figures detached itself from the mass, dropping heavily to the floor. It landed with a sickening thud, its body contorting and twisting horribly before slowly rising. Emily stumbled backward, gasping in disbelief, recognizing with sickening dread the distorted form as human-like, but horrifyingly mutated. Its dark eyes locked onto hers, empty yet malevolent, filled with an otherworldly hunger. It moved toward her slowly, limbs jerking awkwardly, its movements unnatural and predatory. Emily backed into the wall, trapped, with no escape route, her breath coming in ragged, panic gasps. More figures dropped from the ceiling, surrounding her, their twisted bodies crawling across the floor toward her, forming a grotesque circle of horror. They whispered softly, their voices merging into an unsettling chorus of torment. Emily screamed desperately, covering her ears, eyes tightly shut, praying for the nightmare to end. Yet the figures drew closer, their whispers becoming louder, more insistent, clawing relentlessly at her sanity. Just as they reached her, their shadowy forms poised to claim her completely, everything fell suddenly silent. Emily opened her eyes, heart racing painfully, finding the room empty. The figures vanished as abruptly as they appeared. But the terror lingered heavily, a stark reminder that she was losing control. The line between reality and nightmare was dangerously thin now, and Emily knew that unless she found a way to escape, the crawling fear would consume her entirely. Chapter 11. The Ceiling's Secret. The nightmare had escalated. Emily could no longer tell where reality ended and where the horror began. Each passing day only deepened her fear as the malevolent force that had taken root in her apartment grew bolder and more relentless. It was as if something inside the walls had awakened, its presence suffocating and all-consuming. She could feel the weight of its oppressive nature seeping through the walls, pressing in on her, squeezing every last bit of comfort out of her once peaceful home. After the terrifying experience with the crawling figures, Emily knew she had to find a way to end it all, to stop the horror once and for all. But how could she confront a force so insidious, so deeply embedded in her home? The forgotten room, the whispers, the crawling figures, they were all connected, pieces of a puzzle she still couldn't solve. But Emily had no choice but to keep looking for the answers, hoping that somewhere, hidden deep within the apartment's walls, there was a clue that would finally set her free. The storm outside raged on, and Emily sat at her kitchen table, staring at the window as raindrops pelted against the glass. The world outside seemed distant, as though it existed in a separate reality from the one she inhabited. She could hear the thunder crashing and the wind howling, but they sounded muffled, distant. Her attention was drawn to the low hum that filled the apartment, a sound she had only just begun to notice but now could not ignore. It was a constant, unnatural buzz that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. One stormy evening, as lightning flashed in the distance and thunder rumbled through the air, Emily stood in the middle of her apartment, trying to steady her racing heart. The storm outside only added to the oppressive atmosphere that filled the room. It felt as though the very air in the apartment was thick with malevolent energy. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, flickering in the dim light of her lamp. The power had flickered off several times, leaving the apartment eerily quiet. The distant rumble of thunder grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards as if the earth itself was alive. Emily's chest tightened with every passing second, her breath shallow and fast. Her eyes fell to the ceiling once again, where dark marks had appeared, spreading like veins across the plaster. The patterns were like something out of a nightmare, unnatural, spiraling shapes that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Emily's gaze was drawn to them, unable to look away despite the overwhelming sense of dread that gripped her chest. The longer she stared, the more the patterns seemed to grow, stretching outwards in an almost sentient way. The marks twisted and curled like serpents, each new coil adding more weight to her already heavy heart. With trembling hands, she reached for the flashlight and climbed onto a chair, shining the beam upward. The more she looked, the more the marks seemed to shift, almost as if they were alive, moving ever so slightly under her gaze. She could feel her breath quicken, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. The marks were no longer just scratches. They were a sign, a map of sorts, leading her to something hidden in the ceiling. A low rumble of thunder shook the apartment, but Emily remained frozen, mesmerized by the growing pattern above. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest, louder than the storm outside. She followed the lines with the light, tracing them across the ceiling until they led to a single spot, an old, weathered patch of plaster that seemed to have been deliberately covered. She couldn't remember ever noticing it before. Her heart raced as she climbed down from the chair, moving cautiously toward the spot. The air felt colder now, thick with an unnatural chill that made her skin crawl. Every step she took toward the patch seemed to make the temperature drop further, as if the very space around her was growing colder, feeding off her fear.